I'm Garth McKenzie from traderscorner.co.za, and this is your weekly look at the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ indices. So as always, we start with a look at the S&P 500 daily chart. The market has sold off a little bit over the last 2 weeks, as you can see on the chart over here. And last week, there was quite a big gap to the downside, and that gap occurred at around about 33.90. Now, I've been watching the support zone at about 3200 to 3225. The market hasn't quite got down there. It got as low as 32.40 and seemed to bounce off of that level. And at the time of recording this, the futures are quite strong and looks as if there's a positive start coming for the S&P 500 today. So it looks as if the market's going to probably have a look up at that gap at 33.90, and then we'll have to see what happens from there. Obviously, the US election is the big talking point this week, and Americans going to the polls today, and we should start to see results trickling through from tomorrow, and then we'll get a better insight as to what that is looking like and whether the market likes the result or not. But I think from a technical perspective and ignoring all of those political considerations, we've got to keep an eye on that gap at about 33.90, and then your 50-day moving average comes in just above that, which is at about 3,400. And I think we need to see how the market responds at that 3,400 area as well. Then if we move on to the hourly chart of the S&P 500, there you can see the recent trading activity in a bit more detail. Notice that there seems to be an inverted head and shoulders pattern setting up at the bottom there. And with the futures looking quite strong, it does appear as if the S&P 500 might be trying to validate that inverted head and shoulders pattern and potentially open a move higher. A move above the neckline of that inverted head and shoulders pattern would validate that, and it would open a move towards that gap at 33.90 that I've alluded to. And then above that, at about 34.20, there's some overhead resistance as well. And that was where we saw a bunch of previous lows through the middle of October that acted as previous support, and now that acts potentially as resistance into a rally. So looking at this chart, your first resistance areas to monitor is 33.90, then around about 3,400 at the round figure, and then 34.20. And let's see what happens up at that point, whether the market stalls there or whether it is able to break through that larger downward trend. Then let's take a look at the NASDAQ 100 index. This is the daily chart that we've got up first, and a similar looking chart to the S&P 500 as you would imagine. Notice also there's been a sell-off over the last 2 weeks. Market does appear as if it's bouncing off the 11,000 area, and the futures are quite strong at the time of recording this. Some downtrend resistance comes in at about 11,400, and if that 11,400 area were to be broken to the upside, then that would be a bullish development potentially, and that could open a move up to 11,600 as the next resistance, and ultimately if that was broken, then up to 12,000. So we'll have to see whether this market is able to break that shorter term downtrend at 11,400. Then let's take a look at the hourly chart of the NASDAQ. This shows the trading history in more detail over the last few weeks. And there you can see the significance of that 11,400 level that I mentioned on the daily chart. Notice that's where the downtrend comes in, and it joins all those highs since the middle of October. So that's going to be a big level to monitor, and the market would need to try and get above there to open a move up towards the gap in the chart, which is at 11,600. And then if that was taken out, then we could possibly see a move back up towards the 12,000 area for the NASDAQ. So those are the levels to watch. Obviously, the election is going to be a volatility creating event in all likelihood. But from a technical standpoint, those are the levels to watch on the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ. I'll be back with you again next week, where we'll take another look at the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ indices.